Okay, well, first of all, once again, let me just say apologies on behalf of Michael Lee, who otherwise would have been chairing this evening, but unfortunately at the last moment couldn't be with us. I'm Paul Talbot. I'm a board member of BITUD. In a previous life, I worked for both Community and Unite, the trade union in the UK. I've been retired from the trade union movement now for a few years, and but I'm still fairly active in various forms from time to time. Tonight, of course, hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Peter just disappeared from the screen there. Tonight, of course, we've got the TUC Fringe meeting, which you're all very welcome. Our subject matter, of course, is COVID and the trade unions, lessons from both Israel and the UK. And it doesn't really require much of an introduction from me to say how difficult the past 18 months have been for everyone, not just in the two countries mentioned, but everyone across Europe and for that matter, worldwide as well. It's been a totally unprecedented time. The challenges which each country has faced, the way in which they've gone about it, the implications that are there for working people have been unprecedented. And I think each of us in our own particular way has been trying to find a way through this, having no precedent, having no background to this whatsoever, in order to try and do the very best that we can. In the UK, the TUC has been involved with government at various stages, trying to formulate some policy. I know that we're going to hear from our speakers tonight some of the experiences that they've had within their own countries as well. Individual unions have also been trying to give guidance to their members about how these matters should be directed. But I think this is a situation in which every country, every organization has been looking right across the world to try and identify some of the best practice that we can possibly introduce to our own country and for that matter, for the benefit of the membership that we represent. So it's going to be very interesting tonight to listen to each of the contributions that will be coming from our colleagues. I'm sure we'll learn quite a considerable amount from what we have to hear. I'm proposing, I think, as we discussed a moment earlier, that what we'll do is we'll have the three speakers, the main speakers first of all, roughly speaking about 8 to 10 minutes per person, if that's okay. And then at the end of that, we'll take any questions that we may have from the general audience. And I would just simply say to people, this is a trade union meeting. We take this meeting with respect and dignity, and we respect each other's point of view. Even from time to time, we won't necessarily agree with what the particular speaker has to say. Although tonight, I think we'll all be in great awe of what we've actually got to hear. So let me, without any further ado, introduce our first speaker. It's Peter Lerner. Peter is the Director General of International Relations at Histadrut, TUC in Israel. He became Director General in 2019. He's responsible for all of the Histadrut's worldwide activities, including establishing, enhancing, and intensifying the Histadrut's global reach, mutual learning, international solidarity, along with challenges for the labour movement in general. And if that's not enough to be going on with for one day, I would simply say to Peter, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here on the side event. I think BITUD has done a wonderful job in organizing this. And I think that it's definitely, I hope that next year we can be in the UK and participate perhaps in a side event, on a Fringe event there. I think it would be beneficial for everybody. And of course, we will do our best to participate and come along. This last year and a half has turned Israel upside down, but not only because of COVID. We've had the political turmoil has been unprecedented as much as the health issues here. And what we've seen in the last year and a half is a situation where we've had 4 rounds of elections. We've not had a budget, and we've had a reality of constant political and as a result, economic instability. Sorry, things are beeping around me. A very difficult way to try and predict how the trade union movement needs to address those as a whole, and specifically the Histadrut and our 28 affiliates in the country, of how we need to adapt to those developments, whether the political or the economical. And at the end of the day, the impact of every single household in the state of Israel of the pandemic, in a reality where the state of Israel is trying to, I would say, lead the way in issues such as vaccination, but unfortunately, from our perspective, not dragging its feet in many of the issues to do with workers' rights, and the types of supports and safety nets that the workers require. So I will say that the most positive thing that we can say is that at least since June, we have a new government, which has actually begun the process of getting a budget through. And that brings new challenges towards the trade union movement, because it's not only politicians campaigning about what they plan on doing, which was a very difficult situation because we had extreme right neoliberals talking about the need to curtail and prevent and disband trade union activities and limit the trade union influences on society. And they were campaigning about it for 2 years. It became some sort of a bon ton in some political circles. And now some of those people are part of the government, but the government is also made up of people from the left. So they've come to sit around the table and agree to disagree on many of the things, but not proceed them. And I'm happy to say that, at least for the time being, most of those issues that were intended on curtailing trade union activities have been at least shelved for the time being. And people are focusing now on how do we bring back the economy, how do we ensure that people get back to work. And I think this is how we've been trying to adapt. So I'd say up until the vaccination program began in Israel, and it was a very swift one, one of the fastest in the country, the Histadrut was primarily trying to cushion the influence of COVID. That cushion came in the form on, I would say, two main issues. First of all, the furlough program, which was intended on giving people an income. But the Israeli model of the furlough was, in our view, while we supported it initially, was a bit lopsided in its implementation, because what it actually did is it created a disconnect between the employers and the workers themselves. The government distributed to the workers directly, and the employer and the employees had severed their relationship, leaving a reality where there was no dependency, very little contact. When the employer wanted to open shop again, he had to re-recruit workers, and it wasn't necessarily the same worker. The furlough program continued for about a year, around 14 months altogether throughout the country. And in July, they began cutting it back in order to try and encourage people to go back to work. And the Histadrut initially was supportive of this. So we had people, younger people, up until the age of 45, which did not receive again any more government support from financial support. And that eventually led them into a reality where they were going back into the workforce. We haven't seen it pick up pre-COVID levels, but we have seen quite a bit of people coming back to work. Of course, the issue of personal protection, of vaccination as a condition, these are the types of things which are now looming throughout. There's been talk this week of a government proposal to make it compulsory in certain spheres that people need to get vaccinated. And I can imagine my friends from teachers' unions will weigh in on that, because it's definitely looming in their corner of the world. So we had the furlough issue, we had collective bargaining, which was in order to make sure that those that are essential workers are have a framework of employment that gives them the ability to continue work, whether it's lab technicians, nurses, people, administrative people in hospitals, all of the essential services that do not fall under the doctors or the teachers, which do not fall under the Histadrut, which were extensive, but the collective bargaining agreement for the government sector, for the public sector, also fell under the Histadrut. What we've tried to do is create a situation where after realizing that the self-employed in Israel, while there are many organizations and umbrella bodies, there was nobody that was actually coming and approaching the government with a substantial plan of action. And the Histadrut brought a plan of action on behalf of self-employed, and we've including legal support for the individuals, approaching the national insurance authorities, and we've even put a bill on the table in the Knesset to create a safety net for the self-employed in the state of Israel, which has still not been passed, and we still expect it to be take some time. But it's in the motions, and Histadrut is pushing that on behalf of the self-employed. I think the most affected here in Israel have been probably 4 or 5 specific sectors, which is similar to around the world. The issues of tourism, aviation, youth, women. I would also add disabled, and these are people that have been disproportionately impacted by the virus, and these are the people that are going that are either were the first to be put out of employment, or were already earning a low wage and had other responsibilities like women, which most of the burden of upholding households fell on women that continued to work from home, or tried to work from home, or were they working from home, or actually sleeping at work. I would say that moving forward and trying to stay within the time frame that you gave me, Paul, I'd say moving forward, we're actually a bit optimistic with regard to the new government. The Histadrut feels that there is a partner in the government, whether it's the Minister of Finance or ministers from the other different political parties. But I would say that the political stability from our perspective, and the fact that there is a budget for the government for the first time in 3 years, means that there are actually things that are shifting on the ground, things that are moving. Now, some of those are good and some of those are bad. We have the neoliberal voices still around and still pushing some of their issues for restricting our organized labor. But as I said, we are operating in a way across the political spectrum in order to keep those in check. We are working currently on raising the minimum wage. The minimum wage in Israel is 5,300 shekels. We're aiming to raise that to 6,000 shekels, so from about 1,200 pounds to 1,400. So it's relatively low. And we feel that that would help the economy bounce back, because people would have more money to spend, and the ability for them to be their purchasing power would increase, and people would be better off. And on the other hand, we feel that it's time for a reduction of week work hours. Israel is one of them. We still work on an average of about 42 hours per week here, which in most of Europe it's around 35 or 36 week hours. So we believe that this is the time now in the shadow of COVID to move forward and bring the economy out and improve the situation for the employees and workers and the economy as a whole. Because as we all know, decent people making decent wages make a decent society, and that is something we all have to work for. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you, my colleagues and friends who have joined from TUC. I want to celebrate the Congress. I think it's such an important time to come together, even if it is virtual. And I do hope that next year we can all meet and have a nice beer.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Very interesting contribution indeed. And I'm sure there'll be a few questions at the end of this, and we come back to you on some of the points you've made. Our next contributor is, let me just find our notes here, is Edna David, who is the Deputy General Secretary of the Israeli Teachers Union, and joined by two colleagues, Pesha Landsberg, who is the Secretary and General Manager, and also Yossi Michael, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's from the Foreign Relations Coordinator as well. So can we have, I can't quite see her on the screen.
They are here.
You're there,
Here
sir?
we are.
You're there. Okay, great. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
So I'll begin.
Please, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Edna David. I'm the Deputy of the Director General Secretary of Israeli Teacher Union, called Histadrut Hamorim, ITU. I've been the Deputy of Yafa Ben David for the last 5 years, and I'm from Haifa, a beautiful city in the north of Israel. As an Israeli teacher union, we represented 160,000 members in the field of education, starting with kindergarten teachers until high school teachers, college teachers, and inspectors. The past year and a half has been a challenging period for us as teacher union in many levels. First, we had to act fast and deal with the unknown and unexpected almost every day. The lockdowns and the periods in between have made us find creative and logical solutions for the education system to try and maintain some kinds of routine. Second, we had to deal with the rights of our members and to make sure that their salaries, rights, and vacation will not be harmed. Third, we needed to provide emotional support for our members who had to deal with new experience for the first time for them as well as for us. I'm proud to say that Israel Teacher Union has been present and involved in the situation from the very beginning of the COVID-19, giving educators the professional, emotional, and even financial support they needed because they have been in the front line. From the beginning, we held an emergency room for all members all over the country. We had experts, psychologists, social workers, and other people answering questions, giving advice and providing the teacher with emotional support they needed wherever they needed. We understood from the beginning that good communication with the government is essential to make the necessary adaptations in the education system to reach agreements about the kind of teaching and learning, and of course, to take care of the teacher's health and rights. We had important achievements such as teaching on Zoom during lockdowns and providing the teachers with full salary and the regular social conditions. Since teachers had to work harder online, preparing materials, presenting social methods, and actually inventing themselves every day, our Director General Secretary, Yafa Ben David, and I had to struggle with the finance ministry and convince them that education workers deserve full salary without violating working agreements such as vacations or holidays. We always we also succeeded in shortening the hours of working per week for 5 days a week with 5 hours a day, both online and at school. We also demanded to learn in small groups, and it helps to prevent the spreading of the virus. Our main concern was and still is the health of our members. So we came to an agreement with the government to vaccinate the teachers first, so they can go to school safely. This was an important achievement. The vaccine started in Israel in December 2020, and the ITU made it possible for all members in the education system to be vaccinated very soon. Our power was always been filling the field and acting quickly in good communication with the members on the one hand, and with the government on the other hand. Even we had a lot of disagreements with them. In addition, ITU made sure to keep high the state of mind of our members, both active members and retired members and their family. In all lockdowns, we provide leisure activities such as lecture in different subjects and online courses. Moreover, we gave them the chance to enjoy it from sports activities and cooking courses online, as well as live shows and plays, both for adults and children. Nowadays, we are deep in the fourth wave, and the government has invited our Director General Secretary Yafa Ben David to be part of the Corona cabinet. It shows our power in determining important decisions concerning the education system in Israel. Yafa Ben David is always keep in touch and in contact with the different sectors of our members in the education field, such as principals, special education teacher, inspectors, and therefore she is familiar with the different unique needs. We have a lot of challenges coming. COVID-19 is still here. All of our members are united and believe in our leader, Yafa Ben David, to keep leads us and fighting for education's rights. Finally, last week, we celebrate the Jewish New Year. At this occasion, I would like to bless all the members here with good health, good year, and a very successful doing for workers all over the world. Thank you.
Edna, thank you very much. That's a very interesting contribution. And there are some obvious differences between the approach that's been taken in your country compared to what the situation has been here in the UK. But I'm not going to abuse my position as chair and start asking you some questions. So I will move on, if you don't mind, to our final contributor today, who is Kate Dearden from my old organization, Community Union. And Kate is head of research, policy and external relations at Community. She leads on Community's political work. She also represents the union on the Labour Party's National Policy Forum and is a member of Labour Women's Network Management Committee, campaigning for women's equality and further representation within the Labour Party. So Kate, a very great welcome to you tonight, and we look forward to your contribution.
Thank you, Paul. I've been really looking forward to learning from union colleagues in Israel, and it's been fascinating to hear about your experiences, Peter, and particularly the work and initiative you've taken for self-employed workers. And Edna, brilliant to hear about your work in the education sector and sort of the direct experiences of your members. So thank you so much for sharing those experiences. slightly different experiences to the situation in Israel, I think in the UK. We thankfully haven't had to struggle with the pandemic and numerous general elections at the same time. I can't even imagine how that's been for you. We have had to deal with, in my opinion, quite an incompetent government. But if I focus on that, it'll probably take me way over my 10 minutes. So instead, I'm going to just talk to you a bit about community, my union, and sort of the experience of our members during the pandemic, what support we want going forwards in sort of the ever-changing world of work, and how we can continue to represent and support the modern worker in the UK. So for those who might not be aware, at Community we represent workers across a diverse range of members and sectors, which means that working arrangements have been extremely different for our members, and that massively varies by sector. We have members in the education and early years sector, justice and immigration, manufacturing, in particular the steel industry, all the way to sort of social care, logistics, finance, and members who are freelance and self-employed as well, who obviously work in a mixture of sectors across the UK economy. The majority of people in certain sectors, for example, steel and justice, have continued to work in their workplaces, to many in education, similar to Edna, juggling sort of virtual learning to restrictions in the classroom. And then sort of in our charity and finance sectors, they've continued to work from home, and many more have been furloughed. So it's been a real different experience for a lot of our members, required us as a union to respond in different ways to make sure that every member, no matter their circumstances, have been supported by us as a union. But the pandemic's also exacerbated a lot of existing challenges that our economy in the UK experiences and workers face every single day inside and outside of the pandemic. When we've been surveying our members just to find out their direct experiences and how the pandemic's impacted them, particularly in their incomes, we found that 32% of members experience a fall in income. And in particular for our self-employed members, that figure rose to 84%. And I think that showed just how important government support schemes are and have been in the UK throughout the past year or so, supporting members who have been directly impacted and unable to pay for their bills, to put food on the table. It's been that difficult for a lot of our members. Support packages, the job retention scheme that comes to a close this month, and I'll talk about that later in our marks about what we want to see in place of that job retention scheme. And the self-employed income support scheme, what next for self-employed workers? How will they be supported going forwards in the UK, who currently don't have many rights and not much of a security net either? And when we've heard from members, they've really been struggling, having to live off statutory sick pay, which is less than £100 a week in the UK, or reduced income. And at Community, we set up a member support fund to directly support those members, and that fund is still going to help them put food on the table and pay their bills at the end of every week. So I think the value of trade unions throughout the UK and the real impact that we've had on people's lives, both at home and at work, have been absolutely vital, not just at Community, but all across the trade union movement, with sister unions all across the UK, and many of which have been at TUC Congress, obviously, over the past couple of days. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without the amazing support of our union representatives across the country, who have gone above and beyond in countless ways, ensuring everyone has a safe workplace if they have gone back into work, or if they're working from home, that they've stayed connected with other members and colleagues, or if they need to, that they can access the furlough scheme. So the value of trade unions has been absolutely vital here in the UK. And it's also exposed the crisis, the work of good employers and working in partnership with trade unions to actually make work decent and a safe place to be. For us, that's been on health and safety that I've already mentioned, but also on flexible working, on the consultation schemes. And since those restrictions have been lifted, looking at bonuses for our members who have worked day in, day out and above and beyond, and have continued to put themselves and their families at risk during the past year. But unfortunately, there's always another side to the coin. There have also been bad employers with bad practices, who have thought they're above the law and have made decisions and not taken into account the interests of their employees. Just to name a few, we've seen sort of disgraceful practices of fire and rehire, more so recently, which is a huge topic in the UK, with employers sort of refusing to pay rises to existing staff, but giving bonuses to new employees, to some members not being paid at all for a year, and one employer sort of actually pocketing that furlough money. So we have seen two really extreme different circumstances for our members. But in every single one of those situations, it's vital that unions and we at Community continue to look to the future ensure that unions, are responsive to the needs of the modern worker, and work with the good employers and stand up to the bad ones when we need to. So I think there are too many people out there who need a union. And as the world of work continues to change, we as unions have got to be in sync with those realities, remaining and looking like those workers and speaking to them, so we can protect those interests and make workplaces better. But also it's raised many questions as to how we change the mindsets of some employers, that unions aren't actually detrimental to their businesses, how we can continue to work together beyond this pandemic to ensure that workers are prepared for whatever changes they might face, and tell employers that this approach can actually help them too. So many changes coming out of the pandemic, technology changes at work, the impact that climate change is going to have on many of our industries that we represent and sectors. There's so many challenges that we have to work in partnership together to tackle and achieve the best for workers. So looking beyond our work with employers and potential employers with sort of collective bargaining, I'll focus now a bit more about the support we need and we're looking for in future emergencies, and with the changing workplace is sort of the key ask for our members going forwards in the UK. As I've said before, we've got lots to sort out when it comes to employment rights and support for workers. I'm in particular really concerned about the government's appetite to actually properly act in this area and fix the problems that the crisis has exposed. We've waited a very long time and we're still waiting for an overdue employment bill in the UK that should address a lot of these challenges. But we've got a government that's pushing it back and pushing it back, whether that's just sort of a situation that they're facing or if it's on purpose. You can sort of read between the lines, but that's one issue that we're still waiting for to address the many challenges. But I'll just quickly break that down, what that looks like, and what we want to see. And first of all, just to echo Frances O'Grady's remarks at Congress today, which hopefully a lot of you got a chance to see, and if not, do have a look at it. It was a really impressive speech, and she sort of demonstrated and reinforced the TUC's call for a permanent short-time working scheme in the UK. So that's sort of going beyond the current furlough scheme and will help workers from losing their jobs in times of crisis. So ensuring that anybody who isn't working for a significant part of their usual hours gets access to funded training and helping them to adapt as the economy changes. At the moment, we've still got around 1.9 million people in the UK still on the furlough scheme. So there's a real risk of a spike in unemployment as the scheme comes to an end this month. And perhaps we can touch more about that in the Q&A and hear from colleagues in Israel about next steps as well. But in terms of the immediate changes, I could go on forever, but I've got it down to 10 quick ones that I'll reel off. Firstly, sick pay. In the UK, it's the lowest in Europe, and we need a significant increase, but it's also got to be extended to people who are currently excluded from receiving statutory sick pay, in particular self-employed. And that's what we're calling for as well. We want a wholesale revolution in the way that we approach skills and training in the UK, calling for a right for every single worker to retrain and reskill. Technology, as I've talked about, is changing workplaces, and we think that every single worker should have consultation on technology changes in the workplace to actually make work better and less stressful rather than dangerous. Moving on from technology, work-life balance, many people will probably all experience it on this call, and never switching off, and we're calling for and echoing colleagues all across the union movement, in particular Prospect Union, with their right to disconnect so that everyone sort of can have that work-life balance, which is essential. We're calling for more regular and more robust enforcement of employment law, as well as a sort of an end to fire and rehire, which I've touched on as well. And we're also calling for sort of all tips to go to workers, not their employers, as well as a right to request a predictable contract for those in insecure work. And finally, every year we see that 53,000 women leave their jobs when they're pregnant in the UK because of how they're treated. It shows that existing laws are not fit for purpose, and we want to sort of call for the extension of redundancy protections for new mothers. So that's my remarks concluded, and whether we like it or not, the pandemic has made us sort of reimagine the way that we work in the UK, a necessity rather than a possibility. And it's our job to make sure the outcome expands employment rights, rebalances wages, and protects the environment and builds a better future for workers. Apologies if you could hear a crying dog at the end of that. He's obviously sick of me talking. So I'll bring it to a close and look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think the dog agrees with everything you just said. Community, maybe not the biggest union in the UK, but certainly one of the most progressive in terms of pursuing a policy for workers' rights. And it's always been at the forefront of those campaigns. So once again, thank you for that very good contribution. Well, can I now throw it open to questions from any of our contributors or any of the panel? Sorry, any of the audience who are with us here today. Who's going to be first? And please indicate who you are and the question and to whom it's addressed. Hello?
Oh,
Steve.
well, I just had a couple of questions. One in on the Q&A from Anne Alpin. Would Anne like to, I could get her to ask a question if she's okay with that? If I allow her to talk.
Hello, solidarity to you all. I'm on the TUC Disabled Workers Committee, so obviously a lot of the focus of my work is on how disabled workers have fared during COVID and how we'll fare as the economy, as our economy emerges from the pandemic. I put in the chat a stat which my colleague Dave read out to Congress today, that 6 in 10 of COVID deaths in the UK were disabled. That means out of 135,000 people, 81,000 of those were disabled. And I'm wondering, I'd really like to hear what the situation is in Israel with your workers and the protections for your disabled people. Because also we have a problem of, now we're emerging, 62% of redundancies tend to get 62% of redundancies are among disabled people. I mean, we were 62% more likely. I can't remember the exact stats, sorry. But I just wondered what the I'd really like to hear some lessons or you're sharing from how you deal with it in your trade unions. Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you, Anne, for raising that very important issue. Who would like to have a stab at coming back on that question? Peter?
Hi, thank you, Anne, Shana Tova. Thank you for the well wishes. So the Histadrut has a commissioner who's responsible for issues of incorporating people with disabilities into the workforce. He was actually very early on. He was very ill, and it created a whole new reality on the ground from the Histadrut's perspective, where our commissioner himself and his support staff were incapacitated themselves because of sickness. Some of the studies that I've seen regarding employment with people with disabilities in Israel did not imply an extraordinary rate of people stopping work. I think that they, like most of what I've seen, suggests that the biggest issues that they had was working from home and the tools they had to do so. They did not have the tools to work from home or the technological knowledge in order to do so. So I think one of the polls that I saw within that suggested that about 17% of the people with disabilities said that they were not working because of COVID. But it could be a lot higher than that because of the nature of the poll that I saw. And as I said, most of the reports of people that were not working was because they did not have the tools in order to fulfill their employment capabilities, or their employers did not deem that they were necessary or essential employees at that time. So I don't, that can shed perhaps a little bit of light on the subject here. But indeed, disabled, like young employees and women and elderly, were all on that, they all bore the brunt of this crisis more than anybody else. And I think this is something that we obviously as societies, we need to highlight in order to address them, those challenges better for the future.
Thank you, Peter. Do we have another question?
Okay, we have someone from the supplementaries. I know Anne asked something. Yes, she just said something. It's in the chat, in the Q&A, which is more statements or saying what they're doing.
I'm sorry to bother you, but I think maybe Edna wants to say
I'm sorry, of course. Yeah,
something
Edna, please.
Yes,
Please
yes.
about the disabled students. It's also
Yes,
an aspect on this. Yeah.
Yes, I want to add that even during lockdowns, special education worked regularly in Israel because the children have difficulties to learn online.
Thank you. Thank you. And do you want to come back on that at all? Or you happy with what you've heard?
Can she?
No, it's okay. Thank you very much, Edna. That does mirror the special education needs here also, a bit what's happened. And but also we're looking at now how we can make long COVID, sorry, that's changing the topic completely, but how we can give the protections under our UK Equality Act to people who who develop long COVID. And yeah, that was the next question. That would be interesting to know how you're going to deal with long COVID. Your unions are approaching long COVID. Thank you, solidarity.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I don't know if we have an answer to that question at the moment. Does anyone from our colleagues in Israel? Because it's an issue here, which, to say the least of it, is
I can add about long
not
COVID.
very much under consideration.
Yeah, I can add about long COVID that you know, there is still a lot that is unknown about long COVID and its impact on both on children and adults. So it's very difficult at this point of time, you know, to really understand what will be the long terms of long COVID and how and what are the issues that we are going to deal with and what are the answers that we have to give. So I think this will come later on as we learn more about long COVID.
Yeah. Same situation here. Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any other questions?
Well, we've got some. Is there anyone I can mute? We've got Nicole Young. Do you want me to let them say a question? Is that okay? I think you've been muted.
Hello?
Hello, yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can
Yeah,
indeed, yes.
Okay, I don't know. I only came in halfway through the meeting. I don't know how relevant my issue is to you. So just very briefly, I came from Israel. I got COVID when I was in Israel, recovered, got recovery certificate, had great difficulty in leaving the country, which I don't think is relevant to the TUC bit. So I'll move on from there. Managed to get to England, and it wasn't clear on the websites, but we had to, it turns out you have to have a PCR test, 2 days release test by law. Usually if you've had COVID, that comes as positive. And it wasn't clear on the website, but it means that I've been obliged to isolate for 10 days, even though I've completely recovered. I've got no income in that time. I'm on to the MP Teresa Villiers about it at the moment, may go to the press, and hadn't thought of speaking to the unions, actually. I'm actually self-employed now. I used to work for Barclays. That's why I'm a member of the Unite the Union. I don't know whether anyone else has ever heard of this before, but it's something where you can't predict it until you actually get back here. And it's a silly rule because, of course, if you've had 2 vaccines and you have had COVID as well, it counts as better than 3 vaccines. You get the antigen in Israel before you return to England. You have to by law. That was difficult to get, by the way. Come back here. Lo and behold, I had to have the PCR test. It's compulsory. I'm now in quarantine for 10 days, even though I'm completely well.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can necessarily give you an answer to that. I mean, I
I'm not
remember.
expecting an answer. I'm just
No,
wondering.
I know, I
I'm
know.
going through the MP and everything. It's absolutely
Sure,
ridiculous.
I think part of the
As I
problem,
say,
so many changes to the regulations in the UK. I read somewhere that
it's not the changes that are the problem. It's the actual regulation itself. It's just stupid.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Not relevant. Okay, fair enough.
Sorry, we can't be more helpful to you,
No,
but
that's all right. I didn't know what this meeting was really about. You see, I just saw this and I thought it might be interesting.
it's more to do with the implications for people working, and the effect that COVID's had on their working lives, and what
Fair
various
enough.
organisations.
So these 10 days that I'm off at the moment because of this silly rule,
Yeah.
am I entitled to anything for these 10 days? Because I'm not working and I'm normally getting 100 and something pounds a day, or not?
But you say you're working for Barclays.
I used to. I'm self-employed now.
Or you're self-employed. Well,
Key worker.
yeah, that's a key issue as far as the UK is concerned. Some of our contributors have already made this point. Generally speaking, self-employed workers in the UK have not been treated particularly well. And
No.
I don't know precisely what the regulations are. I suspect the answer is probably not. But
No.
I tell you what you could do, just as an aside, phone ACAS. They will give you an answer.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
Most welcome. Thank you. Bye. Steve, any further questions?
There's nothing else. No one has raised. I don't know if there's anyone on the Q&A if put anything in, or the chat, or raise their hands.
Could I ask Edna a question? I mean, Edna, you mentioned in your contribution about teachers in Israel being first in line to receive the vaccination from 2020. Did that apply to all public sector workers, or was it only teachers? Because a similar approach was made, at least an argument was made here in the UK, that should happen. And the government refused to do it and simply pursued a vaccination program which was based on age, starting with the most elderly and gradually working its way down through the generations. So I just wonder how easy that was to have that accepted when this issue first came up.
It was very difficult to convince the government to give to the teachers to be the first workers that getting the vaccines. It was a fight, and Yafa Ben David, she succeeded.
But was it only teachers? That was my question as well.
And essential workers, teachers and essential workers, like doctors, teachers,
right,
policemen, nurses.
Yeah, okay. That's completely different from the UK situation. Completely different. Thank you. Steve, how are we doing in the questions? Any more?
I've got one here from Ian. Ian, would you like to see if I can bring Ian in to ask the question? Bear with me 1 second if I just unmute. It's from Ian Sternberg. Ian, are you okay? Hello, Ian.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, hi. I'm sort of interested to hear sort of what steps the Israeli authorities, and maybe with the cooperation of Histadrut, did to help vaccinate Palestinian workers. As I understand it, there were quite a lot of spurious allegations made by various groups on the far left about how Israel was not helping Palestinians to vaccinate against COVID. And as I understand it, this is not really very accurate at all. I'm just worried. I'm just sort of interested in what Peter maybe can say about how Israel actually did help the vaccination of Palestinian workers.
Thank you, Ian. Peter, do you want to have a go at that?
Sure. The Histadrut from the outset facilitated the Palestinian workers in Israel so that they could continue to work, even through lockdown. They were required to stay in Israel, but the idea was that they could continue to work. The government took a stance that it had no obligation to vaccinate the Palestinian workers, but I think earlier this year, or in the middle of last year, the government decided eventually, indeed, to vaccinate about 70,000 Palestinians at the crossings coming into Israel, in order to give them at least, from what I know, at least one shot. The Histadrut was facilitating that at the crossings themselves. Yeah, we thought it, from the Histadrut's perspective, we thought it was very important to vaccinate them in line with Israel's vaccine program, especially people coming to work, and if they need to come and go, then they should be vaccinated so that they don't get it here or they don't bring it from the Palestinian cities. So that was the solution. I would say still there's in the Palestinian side, there's still a very low level of vaccination, but those that come to Israel are vaccinated, and yeah, from obviously it's the right thing to do, and the Histadrut was all for it from the outset, and we thought that this is the right thing to do, and we were happy that the government eventually did implement the program. But I agree, and there was a lot of debate about the legal responsibility of Israel to vaccinate Palestinian workers and the Palestinian population as a whole. And obviously, the state of Israel does not see itself legally binded, and as a result, that created the internal debate within Israel, but also a debate across the I would say political left and extreme left, I would say, against Israel, criticizing Israel for not picking up quicker than it actually did. But we did the right thing in the end. It took some time.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, Steve, how are we doing?
Well, we've not a bit in the chat. Is there any? There's no one put their hands up for a question. I don't know if there's anyone else that would like to say something. I know Anne has put something in the chat. If you want that raised about. I don't know if you can see the chat, Paul.
Does Anne want to come back?
Yeah, do you want to say anything? I'll just see if you can come back.
Yeah, no, I think Peter might just have sort of actually answered it, but I wondered about, we're reading at the moment that the Delta variant is a really live issue in. So how are your unions able to offer any support to your to workers who aren't coming through the vaccination points in the Palestinian sections? Don't know how to.
So the government did transfer around 100,000 vaccines, but I don't know of anything more strategic than that. We've our working relationship with the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions is open. It's not something that they have actually requested even from us, and even in an attempt of solidarity. I saw your second comment there, the wider global north versus global south issue of vaccination disparity. Israel has given a huge, I don't know the exact percentage of the population. We're already on round 3, which is, it weighs exactly on that. But that was the government decision to do so, and this is the reality. And I know other places are also now talking about number 3 as well. So it is part of the issue, but Israel is here on the forefront of those tests, and I guess we are the lab rats.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Steve?
Well, there seems to be, I don't think I've had anything else from anyone else. Is there, if I'm missing out? There's no other comments or anyone raising their hand. So,
can I ask Kate a question? Kate, you mentioned in your contribution the community, the support scheme that community had established. What sort of response have you had to that?
Thanks, Paul. Yes, we started that last April, so it feels like a lifetime ago. And we just recognised that we had a group of really active members all across the union that were helping out in their communities, and how we could replicate that in communities. It's very much part of our ethos, how we can sort of help one another and be there for each other in sort of everyone's work and home life too. So we had hundreds of volunteers come forward all across the union. I think we're really pleasantly surprised to see so many interested and keen to get involved. And that sort of included members ringing one another, sort of more elderly and I suppose more vulnerable members, just checking in on them and having a conversation, to sort of doing grocery shopping and picking up prescriptions from the local pharmacy for other members. So it's really, really positive response, and we're sort of taking that to the next step, looking at how we can put community in the community going forwards. But yeah, it was a really brilliant initiative and really encouraging to see so many members wanting to help out one another and put our ethos into action.
Yeah, that's great. Well done. Thank you. Dave?
I haven't, I've just seen if there's any, sorry, I don't think there's anything else. I think that's, yeah, there's no one else. I think they're all okay. There's nothing else. I've had I've had a couple of thank yous, but yeah, there's no other.
Had some thank yous.
Thank yous of that.
Oh, there's something come in.
Michael Rubin.
Yeah.
Michael, yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Just quickly, I know, yeah, because I know the time is running out, but Michael's asked, do you want to speak, Michael? Are you okay? Michael, and he works, one of our colleagues from LFR, but Michael, I'll allow him to talk. You're okay, Michael?
Oh, thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone. Been a really interesting session, and thank you for all your contributions. I just had a quick question, if there's time, about the high-tech sector, which is obviously huge in Israel and a growing sector here in the UK as well. I just wondered kind of what success for Histadrut and Israeli trade unions have had in organising high-tech workers in Israel, and if there's kind of any lessons we might be able to take for that sector here in the UK.
I think, again, that's one for you, Peter.
Thanks, Michael. I would say this. We have organized over the last 10 years businesses. Sorry. My little pooch. 1 second. You know. Take it. Oh, it's okay. Sorry. So we have organized some high-tech organizations over the last 10 years. I would say, when asked our chairman about organizing or actively seeking out and organizing the high-tech companies, he says, the chairman, Arnon Bar-David, says something which is quite interesting. He says, we don't need to disrupt their activities at the moment. When people need us, they will come to us. I think the reality of the high-tech sector here is one where we give, we do try and organize, and we give legal advice, but there's definitely a challenge around the corner. And I think COVID definitely highlighted the disparity between how the high-tech companies have made millions and millions and millions of pounds in this reality, while everybody else is struggling. So there's a lot that can be done. what we've been doing over the last, as I said, over the last 10 years is utilizing or enabling them to have enough room to manage and their employees, but make our system available to them for that time when they need it. The Histadrut is currently the largest trade union in Israel with about 800,000 members. It's about 22% of the workforce in Israel, and our numbers haven't declined at all in COVID. We had a slight dip in membership and dues that were collected, but it picked up and people came back, and we're at the same level as we were before the crisis. But we see that more people will join, and we can expect to see that sectors from within the high tech, cellular, all types of companies will be joining us as well. Hope that was sufficient.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, there's nothing else, and I think everyone's because I think people are dropping off now. Paul.
Okay.
Could I, Paul, before you say your closing remarks, just to apologise for the closed captioning. Closed captioning was supposed to be enabled, which would have given us some subtitles, which I apologise to anyone that was affected by that, because it was supposed to be enabled, but I'll have to look at why it didn't. So I give my profuse apologies for that not being enabled.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's been a really interesting session we've had here this evening. It's somewhat unreal to have all these meetings by Zoom and by various other means. And obviously we can't now adjourn to the bar, which we would normally do at a TUC conference to continue these discussions. But I would just like to thank Peter, I'd like to thank Edna and thank Kate for the very valuable contribution you've made here tonight. It's been most informative. I mean, there's so much that we don't know about what's happening in each individual country and the way in which governments have approached this and the sort of views that have been taken by different trade union organizations and so on. But I think, as someone's said many, many times before, no one's safe until everyone's safe. And that really is the sort of bottom line as far as the whole pandemic is concerned. So again, let me thank you very much for your contributions. I hope that come 2022, life will be back to normal and the TUC will be back in its normal environment of having a congress, either in Brighton or some other resort in the UK, and we can all get together. So please, if you can make it, do come and join us, and we look forward to meeting you. Thank you very much indeed for your participation, and I wish you all the very best for the future. Thank you. Goodbye.